YNABers, my name is Jesse Meekum, and this is podcast number 332 for YNAB, where we teach you 4 rules to help you stop living paycheck to paycheck, get out of debt, and save more money. I just wrapped up listening to a book by Nassim Taleb. He wrote Fooled by Randomness and then The Black Swan, and this one is called Antifragile. He's a pretty funny character, pretty mad quite a bit of the time. Philosophically goes quite deep and highly entertaining, but in a way where half the time you're like tilting your head to one side trying to figure things out that he's saying, and the other half you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's totally brilliant. I don't recommend listening to it. It was a little hard, at least for me, to follow. I listened to it at 1.5 speed, which is my normal for books. And 1.5 was too fast, but I can't stand listening slower than I would read. So anyway, 1.5, and then I just bought the book as well, and I'm reading it, hard copy, old school style, and enjoying it immensely. I'll just give you a little bit of a taste of it. He covers all sorts of topics, not just, he's known in the finance world for very, very complex risk management positions, I'll say. And I hope I didn't just butcher that. But now he just writes, and he's a philosopher, essentially. He has this idea of black swan events, which are events that no one saw coming. And everyone says swans are white, swans are white, swans are white. And all of the evidence points towards swans being white. And then one day you see a black swan. And all that evidence goes out the window. And we can see that in science all over the place. And it's always a fascinating moment, I think, for humanity. He ties that into the financial arena, into trading in positions and risk, investing, and basically has come up with this principle that I think ties all of his books together around being anti-fragile. Now, I don't want to go on this for too long for this podcast today. I've noticed lately I've been long-winded. But if something is the opposite of fragile, so says Taleb, that does not mean that when you drop it, it doesn't break. When you wouldn't say, oh, if it's the opposite of fragile, that means it's robust or strong or flexible. That is not that. When something is anti-fragile, the opposite of fragile, it means that if you drop it, if it experiences shock in some way, that it actually becomes better. Where something fragile, when it experiences shock, it will break or suffer in some way. Something that's anti-fragile, when it experiences shock, it will improve its condition. There are all sorts of examples. The one that I like, because you guys know I like strength training, is shocking the body, where you give the body more to do than it would like to do, and it does it. And then it kind of reels on itself as like, whoa, I do not feel good. I feel sore. I feel tired. I didn't like lifting that heavy weight, but lo and behold, the body, after experiencing this shock to its system, responds by growing stronger. And the body could be said, you could say that's a very anti-fragile, very complex organism. Of course, as I'm listening to this book and now going through it the second time so I can really grasp it in more depth, I am thinking, well, how are finances? How can your finances be anti-fragile? And there are a few principles that he talks about in the book that they aren't direct. He's not directly saying, hey, in the personal finance arena, anti-fragile would mean do this, 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 and this. But if you think it through, I was chatting with a buddy of mine at the gym this morning, actually, and he's kind of sitting on the sidelines. He's an investor, and he's wanting to invest in real estate and can't right now. He can't find any deals. So he's just saving money. And he's called it his war chest. And he just said, yeah, I'm just kind of building up the war chest, waiting. And his other friend that's a little more further along in the field, a little more experienced, has more time under his belt as a real estate investor, just say, hey, man, the deals will come. Something will happen. Now, you don't know when anything will happen. You don't have a crystal ball. And Taleb is the first to say that forecasts are for the birds. But what's interesting is if there is a shock to, let's use real estate as an example. It's been not 10 years, not even quite 10 years since we all experienced the big banking crisis and all of that in '08. So let's just pretend that you are thinking, how do I make my own personal finances anti-fragile? And then I give you this example. First, we have to think about a shock to the system, and we'll call that shock real estate shock. We'll say that real estate prices, for some reason that you and I both can't predict, and at some time that you and I can't forecast, there's a shock, and it sends real estate prices tumbling 45% over 18 months. Now, there are a lot of people wrapped up in real estate that if there was a shock to that system, they would not benefit. They would be in a fragile state. Think about what that might look like. What would a fragile person, what would their portfolio look like? What would their finances look like? And you can start to think of a few things that are really basic. This isn't rocket science by any stretch. This is not the confusing part of Taleb's book. But I'm trying to apply his book to something more practical for my own purposes and perhaps for yours. So if someone were fragile, it would mean there's a big shock to the market, big shock to the real estate market, and maybe they are heavily leveraged in that market. Maybe they've made promises to banks that they will stay at some kind of an equity position to be able to float loans or something. Maybe their personal lifestyle has expanded because they've been very successful in this growing real estate market, and then suddenly they aren't seeing the success that they once saw. And so they have a personal burn rate that is fairly high. And that could create a system or a situation where when the shock happens, that person is worse off afterward. Now, think about my buddy that says, I'm building my war chest. I'm just waiting for the deals, waiting for things to shake up. He doesn't know when, and he, of course, didn't make that claim, but he's just waiting, just knows it will happen, right? That's, he's obviously got some risk in having a cash position, and you say, oh, you're missing out on gains, But what he's doing is, now he's not uninvested entirely, but with a good chunk of money, he's just saying, I'm going to wait. Now, he's in an anti-fragile position because he has cash, and cash gives him the option when there's an opportunity to strike. And they always say cash is king, and that really is true. If cash is king, doesn't Dave Ramsey say debt is dumb? Isn't that how? I haven't listened to his radio show for a long time, but I think that was something like cash is king, debt is dumb. Debt is fragile, and cash on hand is anti-fragile because when there's a shock, cash is useful. Cash can jump right in and spring on and buy a home at half the price that it was just a short time before, and then ride it back up as prices recover as they have done historically every single time. So you would say that the person that had that cash position and then jumped when the opportunity was right, they were anti-fragile. They benefited from the shock that hit the system. The book got me going, I'll be honest. And I don't want to say any more than that, really. A few principles that I pulled from it. Debt, it makes you more fragile. And cash makes you anti-fragile. A high percentage of your income being consumed makes you fragile because those things are hard to adjust back down. Living well within your means makes you anti-fragile. Knowing what, this is tied into the second one, but knowing what brings you joy, knowing what truly matters, and making sure that your money lines up with those things, that will naturally lower your burn rate. But at the same time, I believe it also makes you anti-fragile because you have a perspective that lets you not be emotionally so affected when shocks hit. And I think if you're impervious or at least not quite as susceptible to those shocks from an emotional standpoint, you also are exhibiting an anti-fragile attribute because it would allow you to maybe think more clearly, see things as they really are, and be able to jump and improve your situation when shocks come. There can be large and small shocks. A job loss is a shock. How fragile is your system? And I think I actually might talk about that next week. Yeah, I think I will. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that and see if we can't unpack it a little more. Until next time, follow YNAB's 4 rules and you will win financially. You've never budgeted like this.